Throughout the years, core analytic ideas have influenced the way we make sense of the world. Consider Aristotle's logic or Galileo's scientific advances. These concepts weren't theories. They were methods for addressing the questions and curiosities about our daily lives and the underlying details within it. These ideas evolved and developed further as it combined philosophy with hard science. They have since become items we can quantify, and test out in the fields ranging from physics to sociology or whatever new science develops. However, as the world evolves, these concepts need to keep pace, whether it involves adopting new technology, responding to ethical challenges, or examining opinions from every corner of the earth. Born of history, but ever changing, these ideas are still at the very heart of progress, explaining to us an ever more complicated world. I am Gan SUZA, and our group will be discussing historical and empirical status of key analytic concepts of psychology.
Why do we sometimes act in ways that we don't understand? Why do we forget painful memories or react defensively without knowing why? These questions lie at the heart of psychoanalysis, a field that explores the unseen forces shaping human behavior. One of the most fundamental ideas in psychoanalysis is what we call the unconsciousness. Sigmund Freud compared the mind to an iceberg. Our conscious thoughts float above the surface, but lies a vast hidden realm of memories, desires, and fears. The unconscious is part of our minds that stores experiences too distressing to face directly. According to research, it influences everything from decision making to emotional reaction, even when we're not aware of it. But what happens when emotions become too overwhelming? Our minds use defense mechanism to protect us from anxiety and discomfort. These psychological strategies help us cope, but sometimes they distort reality. Defense mechanisms shape how we respond to the world, but are they protecting us or holding us back? In this video, we will uncover the hidden structures of the mind and their impact in our daily lives.
Another concept central to analytic theory is the role of instinctual drives in determining human development. These drives are also known as urges or forces that control our behaviors and thoughts. And there are two basic and primary types of drives. The first one is called eros or the life instinct. Eros drives behaviors focused on sustaining life and ensuring the survival of the individual or the species. And the second one is called thanatos or the death instinct. This represents aggressive and destructive impulses. These opposing forces interact within the individual psyche, shaping their thoughts, emotions, and actions. Sigmund Freud claimed that parent-infant and parent-child relationships greatly affect and influence a child's development. He explained this through his case examples, and for instance, he described a child who was afraid to walk along the streets for having a fear of being bitten by a horse. He interpreted this behavior as a representative of the close yet fearful relationship between a child and his father. The horse was an acceptable unconscious representation of the unacceptable unconscious conflict with the father. And recently, theorists argue that the human motivation stems from relationships with significant people or objects in one's life. Through long-term observation, researchers have linked early relational patterns to later emotional development, influencing how individuals form attachments and how they perceive themselves. The concept of Oedipus or Oedipus complex describes a boy's unconscious desire to compete with the parent of the same sex or their father for the exclusive affection of the parent of the opposite sex or their mother. And this stage, typically occurring during early childhood, is marked by both attachment and competition, where the child craves closeness or even sexual attachment with the mother, while fearing punishment or rejection from the father. These feelings are commonly repressed or made unconscious because of that fear of punishment from the parent of the same sex.
Other than the concepts that we have already discussed, we will also be tackling a few more psychoanalytic concepts used in psychodynamic therapy and are widely accepted throughout psychology, psychiatry, and other associated disciplines. These concepts include transference, countertransference, resistance, and interpretation, which includes accuracy of interpretation. Note that these concepts do not only appear in therapy but may also be applied in real life settings. According to Freud's early writings, transference refers to the process by which the patient is not satisfied with seeing the therapist as an advisor or a helper. Instead, the patient may see the therapist as similar to some important figure in their past, which may affect their attitude and behavior towards the therapist positively or negatively. An example may be that the patient may see the therapist similar to their mother who may have been lost or passed away for quite some time. Thus, the patient may be more emotional and vulnerable and might also be a little regretful when talking with the therapist because of this transference. According to scholars in psychology, the presence of transference in therapy relationships was found to have positive outcomes and is useful in treatment. However, using transference or the presence of transference might have to be treated cautiously. In contrast to transference is another concept called countertransference. Countertransference represents the general and personal response of the therapist to the patient's transference. It happens when the therapist responds to the patient's transferences in the perspective of the therapist's experience with significant others that is relative to what the patient is talking about. For example, a patient may be sharing about their experiences with a friend to the therapist who they find very similar to their mother. The therapist will then respond by telling a similar experience with their personal friend so that the patient can relate. Countertransference was a practice that was to be avoided before because of the tendency for the therapist's personal life to enter the treatment arena. However, it is now embraced as an inevitable part of the treatment process and a way to recognize and understand a patient's transference better.
Unlike defense mechanisms that suppress emotions, resistance is an active avoidance of difficult feelings, which reflects an internal conflict between wanting change and fearing discomfort. Grinson 1967 described resistance as a barrier to therapeutic progress, in which Schuller et al. 1991 identified four types of it. First is abrupt or shifting, next is flat or halting, the third one is oppositional, and lastly, vague or doubting. Resistance also affects therapy outcomes. Callahan 2000 found that a strong therapist-client relationship reduces resistance, while Patton et al. 1997 observed that resistance decreases as this relationship grows. For example, a client with past trauma might avoid discussing painful memories by changing the subject or giving vague answers. This aligns with one of the identified types of resistance by Schuller et al. 1991, which namely vague or doubting. Interpretation is a key therapy process where therapists help clients understand the cause and effect relationships in their experiences, uncovering hidden behavioral patterns that impact relationships. Luborsky 1996 expanded the symptom context method based on Freud's psychoanalytic approach in identifying symptom patterns that influence behavior. For example, a therapist working with a socially anxious client may track when their anxiety arises and discover it stems from past experiences of rejection. Meanwhile, a therapist's interpretation is considered accurate when the client agrees with the identified cause-effect relationship, which QB 1952 linked to symptom reduction and predictable behavior. However, people may accept false interpretations simply because they seem insightful. With that in mind, Christoph et al. 1988 developed the Core Conflictual Relationship Team, or CCRT, in assessing interpretation accuracy, showing that CCRT-based interpretation improved therapy outcomes.
Now let us look at the impact of psychoanalytic concepts in modern psychology and various other disciplines. Psychoanalysis introduced the notion that unconscious processes significantly shape thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. This perspective led to the development of therapeutic techniques aimed at bringing unconscious conflicts into conscious awareness, thereby facilitating personal insight and healing. Moreover, the integration of psychoanalytic concepts with neuroscience has given rise to the field of neuropsychoanalysis. This interdisciplinary approach seeks to bridge the gap between the subjective experiences explored in psychoanalysis and the objective findings of neuroscience. Researchers in this field aim to understand how brain structures and functions correlate with psychoanalytic constructs, thereby enriching both domains. In summary, psychoanalytic concepts have left an indelible mark on psychology and numerous other sciences. Their integration with contemporary research continues to enrich our understanding of the human mind and behavior.